Okay. Welcome everyone to this in conversation between Anjalie Dalal-Clayton and Simone Alexander as part of the event Cultivating Subversion through Feminist Contemporary Art Collecting, organised by Edinburgh College of Art. And in this in conversation, we're going to look at some of the central project themes from the specific perspective of artist practice. So I'm going to introduce our speakers who'll be in conversation, and then I'll hand over to Anjalie to kind of start the discussion with Simone. Dr. Anjalie Dalal-Clayton is an art historian specialising in the art and exhibition histories of Black and Brown artists in the UK. She is currently a research fellow at University of the Arts London Decolonising Arts Institute, where her research focuses on collecting, display and interpretation practices in public museums. Simone Alexander is a painter. She was born in London and studied at Camberwell School of Art, Byam School of Art and Slade School of Fine Art. Her exhibitions include Influences at the South London Gallery in 1998, Dorothea Tanning Works 1942 to 1992 at Camden Art Centre, where she was also artist in residence in 1993, Open Futures at Ikon Gallery, Birmingham in 1988, Dislocations at Kettles Yard, Cambridge in 1988, The Image Employed at Cornerhouse in Manchester in 1987, and Unrecorded Truths at Elbow Room, London in 1986. And Simone will be part of the exhibition Women in Revolt, Art, Activism and the Women's Movement in the UK, 1970 to 1990 at Tate Britain later this year. Anjalie, I'll hand over to you and I will start sharing the PowerPoint.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to be in conversation with you today, Simone, and I think I can speak for both of us that we're thankful to be invited to be part of the conference and hope this will be an interesting conversation for all. So I should probably start by just quickly explaining how Simone and I came to meet each other. Obviously, Simone is a hugely important artist within British art history, and I was aware of her work in relation to the British Black Arts movement, and in relation to some of the work done in the early 1980s with Lubena Hamid. And I had the great fortune to meet Simone a couple of years ago as part of a research project that I was involved in called Provisional Semantics. And within that project, we were looking at an archive called the Panchayat Collection, which is now looked after by the Tate Library over at Tate Britain. And I was working with a cultural leader called Janice Cheddi, and she was helping us to develop some resources to help people engaging with the Panchayat archive, to help people to get to know the collection and some of the artists and practices that it represents. And so one of those artists was, of course, Simone, and I absolutely fell in love with Simone's work upon seeing it. And we've been in touch ever since, and she and I are hatching plans to develop some art historical writing around her work over the coming year or two. And so our in conversation contributes towards that process today, and also hopefully to some of the issues being raised through the conference. And so we've decided that we're going to focus on three topics in this conversation. The first one being to get to know a little bit about Simone's practice and her career. The second is to think about feminist art history and thinking about her work through a feminist lens. And the third thing is to think about the importance of collecting to artists, and in particular, what it means to have one's work acquired by a public collection. So we have some questions already that we've been thinking about, and I suppose to open out the conversation, Simone, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came to art making in the early part of your career.
Two things I think were always important to me. I love literature. but that was always closely attached to images. And somewhere at the end of, I don't know, 16, 17, I did a painting workshop. And that was just, it was out in the country, away from my home and family for the first time, by myself, and all we did was go out every day and paint, and it was just great. I was with other 17-year-olds who loved doing that. And I met Sagi Man, and it was just a brilliant time. I mean, I've always liked painting, but he then suggested that maybe I should apply to Camberwell for my foundation. So I got myself into a pre-foundation course and worked towards that. And I mean, you know, when you're always encouraged, it makes it easier, but it was just so wonderful, the material. Yeah, that was kind of how I started on the kind of formal art education.
And where did you do your foundation then, did you say?
I followed Sargiman's advice, and I applied to Camberwell, and that was just a great year because I liked being there. In a foundation, you're just in every department. I mean, I was wholly useless at some things I'd like to go back and try again. But you just got to try so many things, and it was just a really liberating, exciting year, and lots of life drawing, and just a good year, I think. Yeah.
And then after Camberwell, you went on to do your BA in fine art?
Well, I then moved on to, I did apply to Camberwell and get in, but we then were encouraged to try for Byam. Byam was strange. They had a painting department, a life painting department, then they had an image department, and I went for that. And the thing about the image department is that it's kind of about ideas, and I can't remember if there were any women tutors there. I'm trying to remember. I'm sure somebody else would tell me they were, but there were certainly a lot of guys, and Kitai, I can't remember the other artists who were people that they were looking at a great deal. But the problem comes because it was more difficult because they expected, I don't know what they expected from me, or what, they had an issue with me. And I found it difficult because you go to art college to a degree to get some guidance and get someone to help you find your work in a sense. And I found it really difficult. Spent a lot of time reading it and a lot of time making. I went back to wax crayons, and I spent a lot of time making work with these basic materials. I think the tutors kind of had an issue with who I was or what I was doing, or didn't understand it. And so I became more and more engrossed in reading. There's a list of writers that, Alice Walker, I remember Meridian as opposed to Colour Purple, because Meridian's about a civil rights worker whose work becomes her, and I think she falls really ill. And I was thinking about what was it about the list of writers, including Tazaki Shange, Tony Kadi Bambara. I had whole editions of books. There's people like Patricia Collins Hill and Barbara Smith. These were mainly anthologies of either women's writing or on issues of Black women and politics. And what I got from most of those, certainly Shange, Walker, and Tony Kadi Bambara, is how personal and how intimate this struggle. All their work was about everything they're doing becoming part of their bodies, The Salt Eaters by Tony Katie Bambara, most famously, is about a woman committed suicide in the midst of doing a million things for, I don't know, she's running campaigns, she's looking after a family, she's trying to raise and protect Black women in one other way, and she commits suicide in this. So it's about the body and the work that they are doing. The same is true of Meridian. Like I said, Meridian becomes paralyzed every time she carries out a protest. Definitely Shanghai, most famously known for coloured girls who, I'm going to get it wrong and I shouldn't, but for coloured girls, oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. I can't remember the beginning and the end.
Well, that's all right. But
anyway,
how would you describe the influence of these texts on your practice at that time when you were doing your degree?
I was alone. I was alone and looking for something to help me, because very often, and it wasn't unusual, it's not unusual for a young Black woman then, and indeed now, to be in an institution where you're the only. And so I was looking for some help, some teaching. And these writers provided that. They gave me what Toni Morrison calls home, which is a place where I could dip my feet in the water and just discover myself. And yeah, that was the importance, is that they allowed me. I mean, there were I can think of some of the others, female students there, and there was talk of feminism and women's rights, but something I understood at that time is very often there was a difference, and Alice Walker states it, between womanism and feminism. And we were there is the womanism was not about me deciding to move away and battle against men, but I think the routes that Black women have often take, especially in the civil rights movement, is that they've had to face obviously race and gender. And so that was something that I could easily understand, and they helped me with that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does. And then in terms of the kinds of work that you were making at that time, and then after, you've mentioned to me about girlhood or girlhood empowered, things that you've mentioned to me before. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about some of the work that you were making as you came out of art school, and the kinds of exhibitions you were involved in through the mid-1980s.
Yeah, I think that by the time I got to, I think actually before I left Byam Shaw, I have to, that what happened was that I had done, I think it was 21, it must have been might be my last year, that I went to visit my sister who was volunteering in Kenya, BSO. And she lived in the middle of Kenya, in the middle of nowhere. But it was a terrifying experience, because she exposed me to being alone in the middle of the night and all kinds of strange things. But it was so different for me. And I came back and I painted, I think, Pieces of a Dream. And it's about my recognition, not of race, but my recognition of another possibility, because there you are at art school. And don't get me wrong, I love, which is why it's included, I love the work of Rubens. I remember having to make a whole copy of one in my foundation. And I love the technique, and it's quite beautiful, but then you also realize that, hold on, but there's a whole other history that I'm missing, which is a common cry now, and it shouldn't be seen as it's you know, people have been complaining about there being more for a long time. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying that. And the self-portrait, which I paint also in the same year, is a big recognition of me, big point of strength. And along with what I'm reading from all those women writers, I start to explore the power of myself. Shange's words, I found God in myself. I'm sorry, I'm about to choke. Forgive me.
No worries. So we can see those two images that you've just been referring to on the screen right now. So on the left is Pieces of a Dream, and on the right is the self-portrait that you're referring to, both of which you painted in 1986. So you were saying about the self-portrait and the quote that you said, you found God in yourself.
And I loved her firstly, which I think is maybe the last line of For When Coloured Girls Consider Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And there's a point of power, because what she does in those books, what those writers do is they talk deeply and personally about love, fear, about their lives in a way that when you grow up in school, we don't get. We don't get. And that's where I moved then to what did happen in childhood. And then I go back to about 7, I start looking at what was it, because I was an avid reader. Enid Blyton, you know, nothing wrong with her. I loved Tales of Toyland, and The Magic Faraway was one of my favorite. And so I start going back and saying, and fairy tales, you know, I've got a whole set of Ladybird originals somewhere upstairs that I used to always have out. And I start to, and it just makes sense that in that innocent space of childhood, where, you know, a little, especially girls actually, because it's girls read often more more often and more thoroughly than boys do, not all. Obviously I speak in generalization, but yeah, a little girl would be reading, and what happens in that nursery space. So I did a residency in Swindon, only 6 months, but it was a good time. I don't know if it's worth seeing some of the.
I think the next slide shows the Swindon residency.
And at the end of it, I produced this leaflet, and it was a good time. I mean, I started with just painting murals on the wall. It was a kind of young kids space, and I got to meet lots of the local children. And so I can't remember what's on the next slide. Maybe it's got the mural.
Yeah, so this is so the slide we just saw was the leaflet that you produced that accompanied the residency that you did at the +1 Centre in Swindon in 1987. And then on the
so what happened at the end, talk over you, was that was at the end of the 6 months. There was a showing of work I produced whilst there. So I should have looked this up, because historically I think that I mean, obviously these are references to apartheid. And I just think at that time there must have been huge demonstrations about what was going on in South Africa, in London. And so I gave them these images, which
so we can see in the background of the image on screen now that famous
image from the shop,
photojournalist image from the riots in Soweto, right? The
Sharpeville Massacre, I think it's from.
That's it, yeah.
And so I mean, they were nice things for me to do, but they were also nice things for the kids that came in and out of the centre to see. There's also another image I think maybe on the next slide, which I quite like. It's a bit like how I felt, you know.
So are we looking at Alice with Tweedledee and Tweedledum?
Yes, we are. And how you're guided through childhood quite innocently by maybe nefarious characters. I don't know. It depends on how you see Tweedledum and Tweedledee. But yeah, I see that childhood, a space where you imagine yourself to be the princess, where you take this all in, and with those fairy tales come a lot of stuff that is actually quite dangerous. And this is for all children, as we know now, is that all little girls, you know, they set you up for a dynamic that is not a realistic one. And so they're not comforting. It's how early indoctrination, early how to educate people in a seemingly harmless way. Yeah. I'm not sure what the next slide is. These are some of the images that came from ideas and explorations that I was making during, it was a great time at Swindon because I was playing with materials, and it was like a thinking time. Each painting is almost like a process of thought. So in this one, for instance, I was thinking it's quite topical now. Is that Could You Be My Bow, which is the image on the left, it was on the left. I don't know if we can, yes, there it is. Could You Be My Bow, which is mixed media and acrylic, and it's actually quite thick. I wish I had better images of it because that cross is layered into the image. And I'm talking about Emmett Till. And I was thinking about two things. I was thinking about the time and space, and what I knew about him then was that he was killed for allegedly whistling a white woman. And I heard stories then about him that I didn't know at the time. So, you know, obviously I wouldn't make the same image. But it was interesting to talk about, because I was also a young girl talking about my relationship with Black males, which was also an interest about the things that stood between us. You can't see, and I haven't got a close-up of images of models and fashion and the notion of beauty, which is, something that I haven't mentioned, but was very much a part of those early works. I was talking about who I was also in terms of that stacked against a bunch of Vogue magazines about the image of how I should be. This is what young girls to this day still grow up with. So there's religion as well, and how that impacts on how we grow up and how we live, not because I come from a religious family, which is always the assumption, just how religion shapes the world that we are, and religion killed all good Christian white people killed Emmett Till. We know more about it because this year there was a film, was it last year, there was a film released on him. And I think there's also, actually I can see there's a picture of, I think Kathy Tyson's film. Oh, there's a film that was released around that time that was also interesting. Just talking about, she was supposed to be the star of this film, but she wasn't really. It was about Bob Hoskins was the star, and it's about invisibility and beauty and childhood. Snow Queen Sugar Baby is about me discovering myself, and the idea is we're made of, you know, I think I did some writing about being made of the things that my mother, the spices from my life, the spices that were from my mother, not just pretty things, but real things that for each one of us, you know, reflects, our mothers reflect us.
Mm-hmm. So hearing you speak about some of the works that you were making from this period, and even some of your more recent work, and especially some of the titles that accompany your more recent paintings. I don't know what that's on the, can't remember what's on the next slide. Perhaps we could have a look. Yeah, so this was painted that same year. Perhaps you want to say something about this work before I ask what I was going to ask you.
Yeah, I suddenly realized, sorry, you don't have to go back, on the previous slide, the third image, a children's Four Little Girls, is the image which encompasses, it literally is a book, and and Rapunzel is there. And very often the idea of putting myself in a position, back in that position where I'm with my sister and we're playing at being princesses. So the idea is, and not, I don't know whether this is something that happened in our house, and I know there are other Black women that I can speak about, where you use something like a towel to put over your head so that you have blonde hair as you're playing games. And in the text for that went with the Cornerhouse, it was all about, it could have been me. And I also speak to something, again, came out last year then, is June and Jennifer Gibbons, the twins, who were much exoticized by Marjorie Wallace in the book. She was a Sunday Times writer who found out about them. And yes, she did publish them, but there's such strange things in her book.
So you're referring to the twin girls who there was a documentary about.
June and Jennifer Gibbons. There's a recent documentary, but I read the book many years ago, and the treatment is bizarre. To put two girls in a maximum security prison at that point was just bizarre. But and so I was just like, I'm talking about putting myself in the position. In every case, it could have been me, because things don't seem to change that much, and our vulnerability is constant. And so if you move forward to the piece that's in Woman in Revolt, it's two little girls clutching each other's hands tightly. And what you can't see, sorry, in this picture is that there is also a bear and Little Red Riding Hood. And they're also they're in their living room. They're in a domestic place where they're making up, because so much of our childhood is about make-believe, and they clutch each other's hands to protect each other, because in this world, if they're not invisible, they're their best allies. They're the people who will protect each other, hopefully, through as they grow up.
So in this, so I should just explain, in the image that we can see on the screen now, this is a side-on partial view of a painting that you made also in 1987, the same year that you had the residency in Swindon. So this work that we can partially see is called When You Are Queen, I Will Be Too, brackets Beyond the Nursery Door. And slightly distracting, this is my doing, is an image, is a photo. In the photo is your young niece, and we've just put this smiley face just to protect her identity. But this is a key piece for us thinking in the context of this conference, because it's a work that you made then and speaks to what you've been describing already, but it's also going to be included in the Women in Revolt show, which is going to open at Tate later on in the autumn of this year. Yeah, so you were describing what we can see and some of the things that are out of view in the image, but yeah, please keep telling us about this painting.
Well, I mean, it's funny because there's a lot of programs now. I mean, many things have changed since I was making these. There's a whole raft of programs now about the possibilities of the power of women. And I find this, I mean, on one hand, it's great and it's exciting. The shame is very often is that there's still, I don't know how people don't see it, but there's still, I wish I could think of an example too, but of how they are, we still suffer from things like colorism or the importance of one kind of woman or young girl over the other. I don't know who's writing these. Maybe they were written by men, which is why that's happening. I don't know. But I'm very much about the power that little girls, if we give them possibility, if we believe in them, there's no reason for them not to go up and change the world. I mean, we are so powerful, but at the moment, until they discover a way to have babies without us, we're still a pretty powerful species. Yeah, how exciting we are. And to see, because you do see a lot of it, I have daughters, and to see them become consumed with how they look, not for themselves, but how they look against what the media is telling them to be, to ever be consumed with that is just terrible. But we all know that, don't we?
I was just thinking, Simone, about so much of the way that you've been describing your work, or some of the contexts and issues that your work speaks to, in terms of girlhood and womanhood, and a girl or a woman's place in the world, and the possibilities in a girl or a woman's life. I think, and the fact that, as we mentioned, that this particular painting is going to feature in this exhibition that's focusing on work that can and will be viewed through a feminist lens. I was wondering if you could perhaps tell me a bit about how you think, what do you think about your work being viewed through a feminist lens, and what do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of us as art historians and critics and writers looking at your work through that lens?
Yes, I mean, I'm pleased to I'm obviously, well, I'm pleased to be in that show, and it's nice to be part of that discussion. I think, and definitely because I'm hoping that, in this day and age, we will increase the different communities, or the audiences that come to that show will be wider than when I was making this work. And I think one of the people working on it said it was important that young Black girls or little Black girls could see themselves on the walls of this exhibition. But I think it's important for everyone to see this work or these works on the walls, and not just the Black ones.
So I mean, obviously, a lot of the okay, yes, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say that Woman in Revolt, love the title, wonderful title. We should be up in arms and making changes. And and it's good to be in a, you know, because the idea of this show is well, I think the idea is it from its title is to upend the status quo. Isn't that what a revolt is supposed to do? Is to change things. I think one of my issues always is, and I think I've kind of suggested at it before, is where, and I have been in this position before, is that you will join along as allies and you realize that, what he said about Animal Farm, we're all equal, but some of us are more equal than others. And it concerns me that I go fully into this because I am committed to change, but I find that the change is not people don't actually want ever to really revolt. What they want to do is equity for their sake. So, I mean, this is a long old conversation from Sojourner Truth to now, when Sojourner Truth rips open her bodice and says, "Ain't I a woman?" That I'm now more cynical and more wary of the conversation where I ally with other women, non-Black women, and find that actually I'm only useful in this conversation because they want equity with the dominant male, the white men, and actually they don't want to break things up because I think that potentially we can, but sometimes what's the term? I butt my toe, and I recognize that actually you're not my ally, but I'm useful to you, and that is a terrible moment, and that would be a drawback of being involved in this, is that you're only involved because there's a box ticking exercise, as opposed to a real desire to make a real statement of we are all women and we all want to really change things.
Yeah, I suppose that leads us on to thinking a little bit about collections and the importance of public collections in driving forward change. And I suppose I'll speak for a couple of minutes about some of my research on collections, and then we can branch out a bit more. But so for the last few years, I've been involved in a couple of research projects that have been focused on public collections. The first one was led by the brilliant artist, Professor Sonia Boyce, and it was called Black Artists and Modernism. And that project ran between 2015 and 2018. And in that project, Sonia asked me if I would conduct an audit of works by Black artists across the UK's public collections. And that project, we were looking at the contributions of Black artists towards to modernism in the visual arts across the 20th century and into the 21st century. And to be able, we were always focused on the artwork as object, and trying to develop readings of artworks by engaging closely with the art object. But in order to be able to do that, we needed to know where to find a lot of artworks to look at, and that's why she asked me to conduct this audit. And I couldn't look at every collection in the country. That would be a life's work, but I did look at 30 odd collections across the UK, and as part of that research, we took some of that audit forward in a more recent research project that I've been working on called Transforming Collections. And I mean, that what we found in the audit it varies slightly between the two projects because obviously time has passed between them. But we found that in terms of looking at the representation of Black artists in these collections, and when I say Black, the framing kind of led by Sonia was to use that term in a kind of political sense. So she was interested in using the term politically to encompass people not just with African and African Caribbean backgrounds, but also Asian Caribbean, North African, Middle East backgrounds as well. So, but what we found through the audit was that between less than 1% and 4% of the works of modern and contemporary works in public collections are made by Black artists, and then which isn't anything close to being representative of the population of the UK. And then within that, I tried to sort of look at gender and to see what do women artists make up within that very, very tiny percentage. And it was in most of the collections that we looked at, unsurprisingly, it was slightly more male artists than women artists within that. And we didn't publish those kind of like gender related statistics because it required me to make presumptions about people's gender identity. So I didn't want to get into that too much, but so that's to set some context around where things are. If you imagine, if at best a public collections representation of Black and brown artists is about 4% at best, or less than 1% at the other end. If you halve that or make it less than half, it could be like 1.5% are Black and brown women artists in these collections. So that's the current state of affairs of our country's public collections. And I think there have been initiatives that have started in the last few years to try and change that. I know the government art collection were really focused on women artists for a couple of years, and there might be other initiatives in other public collections. But that kind of leads me on to our kind of next topic of conversation, which is around the importance of artists having their work acquired by public collections, and whether or not that provides opportunities or impacts an artist status. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts about that at the moment, Simone, given that currently you don't have any of your works and are not held in public collections, but that could be set to change. Now that your work was in the Royal Academy Summer Show a couple of years back, and that you've got a work coming up in this new show at the Tate.
Yes, I mean, well, how do I feel about being acquired? It'd be great to have to be acquired. I mean, then we're going to have to talk about what happens when your work has left you and gone into this collection. Since you brought this up to me first, Anjalie, I've been just looking at videos of public collections and looking at more. And it would be nice, just from a video I was watching, if there was some love in or desire. I think that this is just me maybe being a bit naive about how people acquire things, but there should be some, you should want a piece, or somebody should want a piece because it is a genuinely beautiful piece to someone, as opposed to just because we need to raise that profile of women art, or Turkish women's art, or whoever else's art in our collection. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise. It is art after all. There should be some desire there.
So I was thinking about how desire or love plays a role in the acquisitions process. and about how a curator might establish some kind of relationship with an artist, whether that's through a studio visit or some other kind of random encounter or research, and how through developing a relationship with an artist and getting to know their practice and falling in love with their work, how that can provide the opportunity for an acquisition to be made, which is how you would, I guess, how I suppose you would want your work to be acquired, because someone really cares about your work, or it speaks to them deeply, and that it's not just being acquired, as you say, as a box ticking exercise. But it's just made me wonder, and I don't feel compelled to answer this in any way, but it's made me think about the importance of those one-to-one relationships, and then what happens further down the line once the acquisition's been made. So if you know, if a curator or someone in a leadership role is responsible for acquiring your work into a public collection, and then you know it remains in post and is able to oversee your work being shown regularly through collections displays or temporary exhibitions, giving that work its due recognition. And that's always wonderful. But what happens when they run out of steam, or they move on to a new role, or the relationship turns sour, or I guess my question is just what happens in the long life of the artwork in the public collection, and especially for artists who are minoritized, racialized, genderized. You know, I don't know where this question's going.
You said a lot there. And my first thought was that one of the good things about, I mean, I've had a couple of artists. I mean, one of the good things about a curator getting out is that if I was talking about this moment where, about having an ally, and one of the things that I talked about, well, I haven't really mentioned it, but one of the problems I think is that we use, there's this word woman, and I know that there's a lot of conversation, sorry, I'm going back a bit, in a lot of books about ownership of this word. In America, they will say that there's American woman, then there's Black woman, which is ridiculous. But that's often the case here, ownership of that word. So first I need I don't know who the curator is, and a curator could be anyone, but largely, I don't know whether in your research, Anjalie, you did any counting of Black, and I'm using it in Sonia's, with Sonia's meaning of Black curators out there, how much power they have, where they are, you know, who they work for. But if a curator's going to come to visit me, you know, just for the first time, they need to come open, and we need to, because the other thing I'm not sure about when your work is collected in a public collection is how much is written about it, because one of the problems I again have is how much explaining I have to do every time a piece of my work appears. Yeah. In fact, it doesn't just happen with art. I was in a poetry reading, and this poor woman was explaining so much, and I just thought very often people in position of power are really lazy when it comes to Black work, and they just either they apportion a small space for the Black artists to come in and they'll do their own work and they'll explain to us, or I just have to explain. I mean, I was born in London. I've seen much of the same images. Be open. I mean, in the way that I teach my daughters to be open and ask questions, look. And surely, because, you know, I mean, part of my Camberwell teaching, I was thinking about that, you know, I was taught, and I know, to look. and then to relook. You know, most of us have read Ways of Seeing. You know, we all know about, you know, do some work. Don't be lazy. Come to my house, and try and get to know the work and the meaning of the work. And if then curators are acquiring the work, and then if, I don't know, somebody within that institution is writing about it, if there was more criticism alongside other works as opposed to the ghettoizing of talking about Black artists' work, then it would become more available. Am I dreaming? Is this a little house? There'd be more. You know, does it make sense? You know?
Yeah, I think, are you getting at the issue of like developing a nuanced reading around an artist's work and the legacy of that? So even if the curator does move on, if there's, you know, in the catalogue of a collection that there's like good quality research and nuanced interpretations of the artwork, then it shouldn't matter if the initial desire and the relationship between the curator and the artist dissolves for whatever reason. If it's in the record, the different ways that we can come to know the work, then that will carry the work forward on behalf of the artist and the artwork, and whatever relationships that saw it being brought into the collection. I mean, it's made me think about something that the artist Eddie Chambers spoke about, and you and I have briefly talked about this, Simone, is how so Eddie Chambers' very, very famous artwork, Destruction of the National Front, which he created in 1983, he held on to it for a very long time, and it was, you know, anecdotally stored under his bed for decades, until finally it was acquired by Tate, I think in 2015. Apologies if that is incorrect, but around that time. And it's been brought out a few times by Tate, and I can't remember what it was most recently shown in, but I saw Eddie speak about recently about his deep regret about allowing the Tate to acquire that artwork, because of the way that it's been framed and contextualized, the kinds of exhibitions that it's been shown in, and how he feels utterly out of control in terms of how that work is being mobilized for different agendas and in a different art historical contexts. And so I was wondering if that's a concern for you, I guess, something that you're thinking about.
As you said it, I just suddenly thought, isn't Eddie lucky to be able to have the platform to be able to let that be known? You know? I know that there's a piece that was acquired by the Tate. I'm not blaming the Tate, by an artist called Mowbray Adonka, and I don't know if they've managed to. Wonderful woman. I have not been in touch with her for a long time, and I know that there are other pieces of hers, in fact, that I wish the Tate had acquired more. But I know that I see it in places. I've seen it in places where I don't know whether she should be happy, but I don't know that we should have control over that. Once I've given up my work, it's going to sit out there, and it's going to be attached to other narratives, and that might be an exciting life for it. The trouble is, I think my concern at the moment would be the narratives that are going to be quite narrow. It's not going to come out in every possibility, because so narrow is the thinking of around art done by, and I'm going to, let me just say that I'm going to use the word Black, and it's going to mean that wider context that Sonia talked about, just for the ease of this conversation. So my work will be looked at in just that context, and I don't know that people are able to see it in any other. I mean, you know, this is why I spend a lot of time talking, and I mean, I normally try not to, for instance, frame some of the writers I talk about as Black women writers, because they're just writers. And sorry, I'm going back and whinging, but you know, Stephen Spielberg said that the color purple was universal. That's kind of crazy. I mean, of course it is. You know, how dare he? How dare he claim universal just for him? I can't remember why I was ranting like that, but yeah, I think that if one's work is acquired in a collection and it is acquired in the way that I talked about, as in and it is written about and it is given, put in context of the year, other people's work, and then I'm happy with that, because I don't think that once these babies that you create, you give them up into the world. I don't want to control them. They should live in many stories.
Mm. Thank you, Simone. I'm conscious that we haven't been flicking through the slides, and there's so many wonderful, more recent works to be thinking about within your practice. And so perhaps before we finish, we can have a look and a quick chat about those. So this was the work that was included in the summer show in 2020 at the Royal Academy, called Maybe I Never Grew Up. Could we have a look at the next slide? This is called One Little Girl from the same year. And another one. And this one is currently in progress, untitled and unfinished at this time. But perhaps we could finish off with you talking about where your work's got to now, both in terms of strategies of making, but also in terms of the themes that you address.
It's funny because many of the themes that I've addressed, I addressed in 1986, and I still am. What's changed? I'm a lot older, and you start to think about your own mortality. I've also lost a lot of people in my, you know, my big people have gone, and I think in current work that is more evident. I've also had a whole reality check about that comes up, I think, in what is the talk that we You Can't Eat Prestige? Yeah.
Yes, so you're referring to the recorded discussion that you had with Janice Cheddi and the artist Simrath Patti, which is available online on the Tate web pages.
Which is about the ability to, because I've had this whole other work life where I've been working in banking for 20 odd years and raising children, and because you need to eat, you need to as a woman, for me, I need to be independent and be able to, and it's been great actually, because it meant I needed to have my own money to take the girls to art and bring them up to see as much as I could and expose them to as much as I could. And I needed my own independence. And I have more recently, that's the last 6 years or more, I can't remember, come back to making work. And it can't happen without all that has passed having an impact. So at some point, I think the piece that was in the Royal Academy comes from a whole series of works that I have, because I grew up in Byam, and after my father and mother both passed, we went there on one sunny day to clear the house out for selling. And I took photographs of my 2 daughters and my sister's 2 daughters. There were some boys there, but I was focusing on the girls, just running about the house. They're all about, I can't remember, but 7, 8. about an age that I find quite important, and they were all dressed in these beautiful floral dresses with pink shoes, and they were running about the house, and I was taking photographs of them in those spaces that I grew up. I was born into this very house, so it's a good 40-50 year relationship with that space. Those spaces that my parents aren't quite the Windrush, but they came and lived here. And much of the house, some of the parts of the house were newer, and some parts of the house, and the memories that I had here, and this new generation of little girls, and I saw their potential. I saw them as having futures far above what I have. I think Toni Morrison says, I can't remember, I'm misquoting her terribly, because she talks about the fact that writers don't write very often about, there's very little science fiction and futures for Black children. I'm totally
Let's have a look at the image, if that's all right, Catherine.
It's girls, but you know, yeah, this one. It's just, they're in the room, and there are so many paintings I did from here. Sorry, none of them here. In fact, the one behind me is, and I can't do anything about making that any clearer. But it's about the power that they have, these amazing young dynamic girls, and how they can change the world. I've made paintings about them and this changing planet. I see them very much as having the ability, all little girls have the ability, if we could just somehow overcome our hierarchical nature, to change things completely. And I love that idea, and it's a really exciting thing to be making work about them.
I suppose that brings us to something that that you mentioned to me in one of our conversations before today, which was you were pondering the title of the conference, Cultivating Subversion. And,
yes. Yeah, sorry, I was just thinking about it. Is that cultivating just seems so slow. I just imagine some gardener out there. That was my first thought of it. And subversion just sounds, I suppose you do cultivate subversion, but I'm looking for something where we rip up the status quo, and we are open. I mean, I really want to say, I don't know who these curators are, but be more open. Think about, I mean, I've been in so many conversations with white women and Black women, and there's this whole, and things like, I argue with my daughter about intersectionality. I understand the need, but I say, basically, I see it dividing us so much that we let patriarchy, white male patriarchy, get on with what it's doing while we bicker about what have you. Don't worry, I mean, I'm not fixed on anything. I'm still having the argument with my daughter about that. But I do feel that I can't believe that just for my life, that I can still be explaining things to women that I went to school with. You know, that I, as a Black, very used to the word Black woman. I'm a woman, for God's sake, sorry. And I shouldn't have to do that, but I still am having to do that. I mean, you know, don't touch my hair. Girls having comments like, you're all right for a Black girl. Oh, what? You know, all these things are incredulous to me. I can't believe I'm even having to say them in the 21st century. But we should be not just cultivating. It feels like, you know, I don't know how many women curators and where the women are in power within the arts, but if it feels like if we really wanted to we could take much more control than we have. It just feels like maybe people are trying to get a good position and equate themselves with white male patriarchy and not rip up anything. I don't know. It doesn't feel like anything major is happening, and certainly not with the title. Sorry.
No, but I think that's a really helpful place from which we can start the conversation with the live audience next, which is maybe it's less about cultivating subversion and more about burning it all down and starting something completely new with the inherent power that you've depicted in this very painting of these powerful women in the wings.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a wonderful place to end this. Thank you so much, Simone and Anjalie. I 100% agree with everything you've just said. And that's been a wonderful conversation that's just taken us into so many places, and has, I think, also just given some incredibly valuable things, not just to think with, but to act with, like ASAP. So brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.